Hey everyone, welcome to the Learning Guild and the xAPI cohort. Can you believe it? We are actually on week 5. I can't believe it, but we are. We're on week 5 and we're here with Sean Putnam, and we're going to be he will be talking about, not so much me, but he will be developing an effective xAPI data strategy. So that's kind of cool. We're going to learn some really neat things. So, in case you don't know, Learning in HR Tech Solutions is happening in April in Orlando. It used to be called Learning Solutions. We've rebranded and actually made it better by adding on that HR component. Some of the sessions are going to be SHRM qualified, HRCI qualified, and ATD qualified. So if you're looking for any of those recertification credits, you might want to consider looking at Learning in HR Tech Solutions. You will save $100 by March 8th, and I'll drop that link in chat when I'm done talking. And speaking of data, as Sean is going to be talking about, we have Learning Analytics, Ethics and Trust by Jane Bozarth. That you can download as well. It's a great research report, and it delves into some things that are a little out there that we really need to look at. And I'll drop a link in chat as well. Now, if you are new to the Learning Guild and you're not a member, we highly encourage you to become a member because why? Well, it's free, number one. Number two, you'll get some great things like that research report I mentioned earlier, as well as free webinars and discounts on face to face conference. In addition to some of our early bird rates too. So you could really snag some great deals if you become a member. We also offer discounts to our online conferences, and we have webinars and everything. So we'll drop a link in there in just a minute. Now, this is cohort. It's 12 weeks of free project-based learning, peer-to-peer learning. And we encourage everyone to join these weekly web sessions where you're going to pick up a lot of great information from our SMEs here in xAPI and to form yourself into project teams. And if you've been here before, you kind of know the drill. We have project teams and we have channels for them in our Slack workspace. And you can join a team whenever you like. You can create a team whenever you like. You can join and lead the team and have a great project, really robust, or you can just kind of join a team and kind of see what they're doing and maybe poke around a little bit, maybe add a little thing, or you can just observe. It's really up to you because the cohort's for you and to advance your learning and to advance your knowledge of xAPI. And of course, all of these sessions are recorded and we do post them so you can look to them in the future for reference. If you have any questions about xAPI specifics, you're running a project, you've got something you've tried, hey, how do I, but ... or does this tool do this? Drop that question in the hashtag main in the Slack workspace. And a lot of people are in that Slack workspace. I believe it's up to 7,000 people are still involved in that. They're not all in cohort here, of course, but they are former members because xAPI cohort's been going for years and years and years. If you have specific questions about like emails, dates, there's any kind of issues, this isn't working, you drop me a note either on the Slack workspace or you can email me at my guild email there, kgleason@learningguild.com. And I did mention the Slack workspace and Teams. And over there on the left-hand side, I took a screenshot of all the teams that have been created during this cohort. And those are all teams that have said, hey, I think I want to learn about whatever it may be. And they've put it in there. In addition, you can, like I said, join a team, create a team, whatever you want. However, we also have some kind of project partners, as we call it, program partners, as we call them. They are teams that are actually led by some of our xAPI subject matter experts here. And they have taken some of that information they've gleaned over the years and created some information for you to consume, little projects you can do. And there's a number of them in this cohort. In addition, if you are brand spanking new to xAPI, we actually have a beginner's cohort which is run by two ladies who took this cohort last semester in the fall and went through, figured out what they wanted to learn, found some resources, created their own learning, and they're sharing it with you, the new people to xAPI. So if you're new, you don't know a thing, join their cohort, learn some things. Even if you know something about it, you could join it. And even if you don't know about xAPI, join any of the any of the teams. I shouldn't say cohort, but join any of the project teams. All right. So if anyone has any status updates on those teams, please ping me here in the in AirMeet and let me know so that at the end, the last few minutes of the session, we can have you come up to the stage and on mic, and you can give us an idea of what your team is working on. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sean Putnam with Shopify developing an effective xAPI data strategy. I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting. And Sean, when you're ready, go ahead and
All right.
share your presentation.
Well, thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. So glad to see all of you here in the xAPI cohort. I am a veteran of these cohorts myself. Back in the first, probably, gosh, it must have been probably 8 or 10 of these as a participant, as a presenter. So really glad to be here talking with you guys today about data strategy, something that is near and dear to my heart. I love doing a good data strategy and sitting down with a bunch of office supplies, Post-it notes, whiteboards, markers, and really thinking through the data that we're going to collect. So I can hear it from everybody already. Why should we do a data strategy? And the way that I always answer this question is there's a couple of things. I love xAPI. I love xAPI because you can track anything. If you can make JavaScript, you can track it. The thing I hate about xAPI is you can track anything and everything. So it can get really out of control really, really quick. And I can give you a little anecdote from the first project that I worked on, where we built a little API for a piece of software that in the first 24 hours generated 60,000 statements. And we really had no idea what to do with those. So that's where we started talking about data strategy and really understanding the data that you want to collect and where it's coming from. So again, I'll kind of pose the question of why not track everything? Honestly, it's too much data. And what we're really looking for here when we talk about xAPI, when I think about it, is not necessarily big data, but intelligent data. We're not working at the scale of a marketing firm or something like that. We're really looking for that intelligent data that's going to tell us something about the learning intervention that we're putting in place. So if we track everything, more than likely it's just going to be too much data. It's also going to be really time consuming to cleanse that data, especially if you're not familiar with data cleansing, you're not exactly sure what to do to cleanse the data. So if we can avoid that by doing some planning up front, we should probably go do that. And then finally, really, is the data that we're collecting useful? And it kind of goes into that data cleansing point. We want to collect the useful data. We want to figure out what data is going to tell us something, what data is going to help us, show that what we're doing is impactful. And it really, for me, comes down to data analytics, planning out what's going to give us data that we can analyze and show performance improvement, show behavior change, and really understand that what we're doing is working, and having data that's going to help us do that. So I should be remiss to not tell you guys, please, if you have any questions, post them in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring it as we go here. So please feel free to throw some questions up there if you have them. So thinking with data analytics in the back of our mind, let's talk a little bit about planning our project. So as you start to think about your xAPI project, one of the first areas that I spend time thinking about, and maybe it's because I'm an ecosystem geek and a little nerdy when it comes to learning ecosystems, but I really start to think about the data supply chain and where is the data coming from. So when we start to think about learning record providers or activity providers, whichever you call them, where's that data going to come from? And what are the sources of data that I have out there? Here's what we're talking about today, the data strategy. What is the data that I want to collect? So after I've sort of defined that data supply chain, I really want to, again, narrow that data pool down to get to a point of only collecting the information that I really, really need. And then finally, when I'm planning, I really like to think about how can I make the collected data useful, um, and really, sit and think through that a little bit of how am I going to explore the data and what's it going to look like. And the only way to really do that, in my opinion, is to know your data. So really think about or ask the question, what makes the data come into being? And this can be from your ecosystem. This can be from the interventions that you're putting in front of your learners. It could be from the real time in the job type of tasks that they're doing that are going to produce data. Um, so really understanding what makes the data come into being. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute. Um, but really focusing in on that. And how hard is it going to be to get the data that I want or need? I come right now, the last two roles that I've had have been working with sales enablement teams. So as I start to think about how I'm going to utilize data to prove behavior change, things like that, one of the things that I'm always focused on is sales data. How hard is it going to be for me to go in and get access to that data that I might need? In some cases, it's going to be very hard. So you need to understand what those obstacles might be. Not that there's ever politics at play. I know that you all work in environments that absolutely have zero politics, and you don't have to worry about that. But again, it kind of knowing your data goes back to what is that data supply chain. So if I know what makes the data come into existence, how hard is it going to be to get it, and what applications is it coming from, I have a pretty good idea of what that data looks like. Am I going to be able to access it? And really diving into being able to plan how I get to the data and how I utilize it. So let's talk a little bit more about that data supply chain. And I'll show you in a minute kind of how I document that and maybe a few suggestions of how you can do that. But it really comes down to activity providers, and I've seen this both ways. I guess I'm kind of old school, and when I got into xAPI, we always called them activity providers. I saw in the latest version of the spec, I think it's learning record providers now. Just know that those mean the same thing in the world that I'm talking about here. But really understanding what the applications are that are going to be providing the data. So is it an e-learning course? Is it an application that our users, our learners are using in their day-to-day jobs that happen to have xAPI capabilities? And again, I'll talk about that in a minute when we get to an example. But really knowing what those are and documenting anything that could possibly be an activity provider, which really leads us into knowing the system's architecture. So out of those activity providers, do they all go to a central database? Do they each have their own where they store data? And really starting to understand how our data moves from one system to another. I know when I started with xAPI, combining data from different databases was pretty tough. We always kind of worked and fought to get things to an LRS in an xAPI structure. with the tools that are out there today, some of the analytics tools, some of the tools available to you to pull disparate data sets together, it might not be as big of an issue as you would have had in the past. So thinking about the tools that you have to be able to pull that data together, really becomes an important part of your data supply chain. The other thing is something I mentioned earlier, which is that data management, ownership, accessibility. This is something, as you're thinking through your activity providers, really starting to map out your systems architecture, it's something you absolutely have to think through. Who owns this data? How is it managed? Who manages it? And again, that accessibility component of it. Can I actually get to it? Or do I need to go through someone who can provide me access to a dashboard or something else where I can, look for those changes that we deployed something on X. Here's a snapshot from Y that shows that the thing we were trying to do actually worked. So, really thinking through and documenting what the data management, who owns it, the accessibility, that sort of thing. And then really, as I've talked about, these concerns of data integration really are becoming less and less. I had the opportunity to work with some tools that basically you could import two completely disparate sets of data and it would kind of merge them together into something pretty cohesive. So those data concerns have continued to for me, have continued to kind of go away. And I think AI helps that a bit as well. But really, when we start to think about data supply chain and the data coming out of our systems, honestly, what we need to think about is what's good enough, because you're not going to be able to access every piece of data that you need. You're probably not going to have access to every system that you need. I'm going to see a question coming in here around activity providers. Let's see. So, yeah, exactly. So not necessarily where your file or e-learning is hosted, but that is kind of what you're looking for, like your LMS, your SharePoint, your website. And I'll show you here in just a second, maybe some more examples of what might be an activity provider or a learning record provider. But at a high level, yes, think about it as the LMS, SharePoint, something like that. Basically, anything that's going to be producing data within this system. So let's think about, we'll work through an example here and kind of talk about what this looks like. And hopefully that'll answer any other questions that you have here. So let's say that we have a process that needs a form to be filled out, a web form. And we've provided an e-learning course for the process that sort of talks about the form, tells you why the form is important, a job aid that went out maybe through SharePoint, something like that, that sort of, again, reminds people of why this form is important and that they need to fill this form out for the process. So let's think about a systems architecture for this. So at a very simple level, these are the things that we would look at to look at our web form and say, okay, we've got this new process, we've got this new web form, we sent the e-learning course, so we've got an e-learning course within an LMS that, let's say it goes out to an analytics dashboard. It could be in our LMS, it could be a Tableau, something like that. We've got a job aid that we've sent to people to make sure that they understand why this form is important and how they're going to utilize it in their day-to-day job. We've got some Google Analytics there. That goes into our Google dashboard. Then we also have the form in our HTML format. So our form entries, obviously somewhere, those are getting collected. What information is put in? What does that look like? So for me, as I'm thinking about my data and wanting to see, was our e-learning course effective? Was our job aid effective? Here's what my system architecture would look like. And typically, this would be done in a conference room on a whiteboard. I like sticky notes. I overuse those sticky notes Anyone that's ever been in a data strategy session with me can attest to that I use a ton of them. But they're easy to move around and move to different places. So this would be my system architecture for my project. So let's think through this a little bit and start to ask some questions. So as I look at these systems, I'm going to ask my stakeholders in the room and myself some technical questions. What data can we get from our systems? So if we start to think through our LMS, if you feel like putting it in the chat, feel free. What data can we get from our LMS? Things like completion, quiz scores. If we go into xAPI, I could get button clicks and content accessed, things like that. We could also think about what activities provide measurable data. What about if we start to think about our form? Would we get measurable data from what's being entered into the form? Yeah, we probably would. And what about our job aid? We could certainly look at our Google Analytics and think about the activities providing measurable data there. Did they click on it? How long did they spend within the job aid? After looking at the job aid, potentially, did they go and input one of these forms into the system? And did the form get approved? And did it move through the system as it was supposed to? So lots of different things within there that can be understandable based on the activities that are done and things that can be measured. But as we start to look at it, we think about the architecture that we have there, and we start to ask, well, what data can we and should we act on? So again, there's 100 things. If I take you back to my system architecture here, there's a ton of stuff that I could potentially measure out of even just this little 3-pronged system architecture. But what I really want to look at is what data is available and relevant, and really get to that center point there of where those diagrams or those circles overlap each other. And that's really what the data is that I want to look at. I always like to think about this in a chart. What's the data I can get versus what's the data I can't get? What's going to be measurable and what's not going to be measurable? Anything in that upper right quadrant, I'm probably going after that, and that's the data that I'm really going to hone in on. Anything in the lower left, actually anything in that whole lower row, most likely if I can't get it, there's no point in even trying, even if it's measurable. If there's certain data such as personal information, things like that through HR systems that you just can't get, even though it's measurable, it's probably not going to be worth going after. So really, I use a chart like this to, again, go back to those sticky notes, to put my pieces of data that I'm looking at, and I start to put them in my quadrants to understand what it is that I can really get to and really utilize in my analytics. And then I start to write it on my systems diagram. So in my e-learning course, maybe I look at completions, maybe I look at time spent. Again, since we're in xAPI, I would probably go in a little deeper than that and pull some other things out. Our job aids, I might look at the number of accesses. What are the popular titles if there's links off of it, and really start to pull those from the Google Analytics. My form entries. There are a number of things that I could look at here. How many forms were started? How many were completed? How many went through a cycle of edits before they were actually approved? The data entered into the fields and the number of cycles per completed form. Again, that sort of edit circle. And what I really need to do then is decide which one of these is really measurable and something that I need to look at. So I can tell you this actually came from a project that I worked on. And in the beginning, our stakeholders said, oh, we need to know everything that goes on. I want to know every piece of data that was entered into every field, and I'm going to track that. And as we move through the session of really talking through, and I love to play devil's advocate in these sessions, of asking why. What are you going to do with the data entered in the fields? Is it something that you're going to use to measure um, why the form didn't pass, how many of the changes that were going on? And by the time we got to the end of the session, it really came down to, no, actually, we don't need to know about the data entered in the fields. We want to know how many were started, how many cycles they went through, and when they passed, basically, when they were approved. So it's really asking that question of why over and over and over again until you get to the pieces of data that really matter. Another way that I've done this that can be really helpful is through some event mapping. So what you're seeing here is actually another xAPI project where we've got an interface that basically had a bunch of buttons on it, had a bunch of things that you could do, and cards made up with each of the verbs that we were going to utilize. And the verbs were then set next to the screens that they were going to be used on. And you can start to then see which events on this screen. So in the lower end there, that screen has probably 7 different things that could be done, but there's only 1 or 2 verbs that are going to be used, because there was only 1 or 2 things that were really important on this screen, and 1 or 2 things that really mattered to the analytics that we were trying to get to. And what that comes down to, and what the systems architecture and the event mapping can help, is really get down to answering the question of, what do you want to know? Is it part of participation or is it part of performance? And if it's participation related, we ask the questions like, we're trying to answer, how are people using the resources available? So if I've got a set of links and I am tracking xAPI in the back end of those, I want to know how many people clicked certain links. I want to know when they get to this new page, how much time did they spend on it? So again, looking at how people are participating with the information giving them. How much time are they spending? So is it a complete correlation that if someone spends an hour on a resource that means it's good and it's being utilized? No. But we can start to make certain correlations as we start to look at time spent in addition to other items within a page. Maybe it's a video. Maybe it is other links that they're clicking within that page. So time spent can be something that we do look at. It's just not maybe the end all be all of your xAPI. What element resources are proving useful? So maybe we're doing that through star ratings, things like that, to make sure that that we do have resources that people are going to, they're utilizing and finding them useful. And what aspects of participation affect results? So really understanding if someone utilized all of the content within a course, say, and because they utilized those aspects of the course, their results were better. And if we can see patterns in that over time, we can really prove that. And finally, what aspects of participation affect completions? So are people getting through the content? Are there certain things that they're doing that show that they will complete our session versus those that maybe skip over those? And if it's performance related, really it comes down to, are we teaching the right things? How does course performance correspond to job performance? So if we go back to our form example, if people took the e-learning and read the job aid, are they actually going in and filling out the form and having less edit cycles than those that did not? So that's a way that we could look at this to correlate to performance. And honestly, did X have the desired effect on Y? So did we get the behavior change we're looking for? Now, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is, well, you might know this as the instructional designer, but what about stakeholders? So who are the players and how do they fit into this whole picture of um, what is success to them? And how do we define success? And then how can we correlate our data that we're collecting to that success? And really asking them what the change means to them as far as being successful. And what that's going to help us define, and I know this has been the long way to get to xAPI, I know I've referenced it, but really then going into and starting to think about our statements and how can we get the data that we need using the actor, the verb, object? Do we need context? Do we need result? Do we need other extensions that are within the statement itself? So how can we get to this data that we need to get? Some of the things that we need to do when we look at the basics of actor, verb, object, as we get to the actor, is it going to be an agent? So is it a singular person? Is this the right way to identify the learners using this intervention? Can the agent information be obtained from another system? So essentially, where are we going to get this from? And what does that information look like? And what is the unique identifier being used for the agent? So just having an idea in your mind and starting to plan what that information is and how we can utilize that to break up our analytics. Maybe a group is the right way to do it. So is that the right way to identify our learners? What type of group is it? Is it anonymous or is it identified? And if you haven't dug into that yet, anonymous would be like an ad hoc group, potentially. So a group that comes together for a leadership training and never gets together again. Identified could be that group that repeatedly gets together, and it's something that you want to track within your system over time. Is there a name for the group? So again, if it's that identified group, highly recommended that you put a name in there. But these are things that are going to help you identify those groups when you get to the analytics. And should I add identifiers for the individuals in the group? Again, if you have a group, this is optional. You can decide if you want to do that or not. But these can be really important parts of your strategy as you start to get into thinking through the analytics side of the data that you're going to collect. From the verb side of things, obviously you guys have probably been talking about verbs and know that this is going to be a really important part of your statement. So is there something in a verb registry that already describes your action? And is there a concept in an xAPI profile that you can use? If there is an existing verb, make sure it's the correct context. If you don't have a verb or there's no profile, is there a community of practice for the industry? What we're really getting to here is kind of this next thing is, if you need to create a verb, really looking at, is there a language in your community of practice to create the verb? Because what's really going to be important, and you're going to see it here in just a few minutes, is creating that consistent verb usage. And that's such a big part of data strategy, is making sure that you and your colleagues are using a consistent language as you go. And that's the whole reason that you would ask these vocabulary questions for your verb. Again, it really gets to that vocabulary of, if there's no community of practice, is there an industry group that can help you set that vocabulary? So asking a few questions like this are really important. And then the object, what type of object will you need? Do you refer to it? Another statement with the object? This can get a little bit advanced, but it could be Megan completed an interview with Sean. So if there was another statement called Sean is interviewing, we could use another statement, a substatement, to be an object. Does the object relate to an activity type? And is there a consistent vocabulary that needs to be defined for the object? So this really helps you define what the object looked like. And again, we're just trying to get consistency here. The more consistent you are at this stage of the game, the better off you're going to be when you get to analytics. Now, one more time, we ask ourselves, why not track everything? And I'll go through exactly the same thing that I did before. I think you're probably starting to see, if you were to track everything, it's too much data. It's time consuming to cleanse. And quite frankly, in a lot of cases, it just won't be useful. Because what we're ultimately interested in with this data strategy is what is observable, what is measurable, and what is actionable. Now, how do we get there? I think we've talked about a lot of it already, but I have a simple spreadsheet that should help you get through this. So here's what I like to do with the spreadsheets or the data strategies that I run. So here you can see in the right-hand side in the diagram, we've got our e-learning course, our job aid, our form entry, maybe email reminders, all going to an LRS that go to a dashboard. So I'm taking this as I've made everything xAPI compliant. They're going to be shoving out statements to the LRS. So I use the spreadsheet on the left with my activity providers or learning record providers across the top. And then I answer the questions down the left side. What is it developed in? What is the use case for it? So again, remember, we're trying to figure out why this data is coming into being. What activities are being tracked now? What activities will I be tracking? What do we hope to learn from the data collected? What data should we collect? And who owns the data? And then finally, will there be issues to access the data? So this is really important to be able to document this data and make sure that you understand why you're pulling this data into being. Now, the other reason it's really important to document this is because you're going to have to teach somebody why you did all of the things that you did. And that person you're going to have to teach is going to be yourself in about 6 months when you go back to this and have to figure out, why did we pull that piece of data again? And why was this important to what we were doing? So this would show you why you have to do that. So again, it's a very simple spreadsheet. And in fact, I can share it in the Slack channel. I've got a blank one there. So I know there was some questions about, can you make it bigger, that sort of thing. I will share a blank spreadsheet with you guys that you can look at this and utilize it. The other thing that I do goes back to event mapping. And this really comes down to creating profiles for myself and my team. So documenting the activity, describing it, what type of activity it is, because that's going to be important for our statement, what our verb is going to be, and then any extensions that I might need to utilize. Again, this becomes really important because now you can give this to your team and say, okay, if you're creating this type of activity within a course, within a website, whatever it is, this is the verb you should use. This is the activity type it should be. And here's a description that you can use for it. So really important to be able to document those things and really understand what it is that you're tracking there. And again, it's that consistent language that when you get to analytics, you're going to know that you can slice and dice by verb, by result, potentially activity type, and really understand what's going on there. A few obstacles as we're coming up to the end here that you can look at. Data stewardship, again, understanding what lies beneath. So understanding what goes into creating the data, trying to document that as much as possible. As I said, you're going to have to teach somebody. I joke a little bit that it will be yourself in 6 months, but it will be. You might have to show others, but you really need that documentation so that you understand what's going on. And it really helps to then document who controls that data so that you understand who you need to go through when you need to get to data, when you need to analyze it and really understand what's taking place. The last thing I'll leave you with here is just the understanding that data strategy is ongoing. You're going to learn as you go, prototype and iterate. I can't stress that enough, that you should be prototyping and iterating through your data strategy. It will change. What you thought you needed might not be what you have, because everything changes. If there's anything that's consistent in this world, it's that everything changes all the time. So happy to answer any other questions. I see Karen's asking if anyone wants to give a status update. I know we're at time. Thank you very much. If you guys do have questions, I will be helping out in the, Karen, remind me of the Slack channel name. I apologize, I forget it off the top of my head. The Try It Yourself, I think, or something like that.
There we go. It is the spring cohort with Build Capable.
Yes.
Is at the
Okay.
end. Okay, so it's like spring 2024 with Build Capable or something like that in the Slack channel.
Yeah,
I
so
can go
please
look
feel
at
free
it. So
to answer those or ask questions in there. I'm happy to answer them. Thank you guys very much. I will also drop the empty spreadsheets within that channel, and I'll be sure to maybe throw Karen a link that she can drop in the chat next week for those.
that'd be great. And you could also post it to the recordings and resources
Okay.
channel in the workspace, and that way it would be available for those people who aren't part of the Build Capable channel.
Perfect.
Yes, thank you. So lots of great information, lots here about productivity and data. I think you can see here that it was well received. Thanks so much, Sean, for putting that together for us. And I don't see anyone who wants to step forward and go through and give us their team status updates. But just perusing the Slack channel a little bit, I see that Team Frobel, I believe that's how you pronounce it, is looking into different things and looking into some of the measurement. We do have team KPI measurement that is with Jason Haig and team, and that is one of our program partners. Then the one that we were just talking about, the Spring 2024 with Build Capable, is the one Sean is a part of. Spring 2024 with Learning Dojo is the one Jeff Batt is heading up. Team Test Your LMS with Torrance Learning, and that's been an active channel, as also the xAPI xAPI Beginner Spring 2024 is also very active, and I talked about it at the beginning of the session. And if you want to just have an update to your status, you want to bring that forward to the rest of us in the next live session for week 6. I do have a channel that is named Live Session Cohort Check-ins. So drop a note in there and say, hey, I'd like to talk about my team, or we're stuck here, we want some help. Put that question into the hashtag main, or just say, hey, we're going gangbusters and look at what we've done and we'd like to tell everybody about it. Please do it in the status updates. You can PM me or whatever. We'd love to hear from you. I will caution you though, if you don't do that, I'm going to be going here into the Slack channel and reading your messages on here. So I just want you guys to absolutely tell us what's going on. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I am going to say goodbye to everybody for today in week 5, closing on to this week. Week 5 is closed. Next week, week 6, halfway through. Amazing. You guys, this is so much great work. So thanks, everyone. And Megan, do you want to come to the stage? I think she might. So let me just give her the mic. There we go, Megan. She should be coming along here. Thanks, Megan, for stepping up and giving us status. I'm sorry, I was in the Slack channel looking around.
No, all good. Yes. So we have 14 LMSs that are on our list to test. And Teresa just added another one. So now we have 15. So Teresa, come on in. 4 LMSs, well, 3 LMSs plus Squirm Cloud have already been tested. So we have the results on our, or they're some of them are in the progress of being tested. So the results are on a Google Sheet that we have. So a couple things that we have that are important that we've talked about are around if you don't have access to a test ground or the ability to load files into your LMS, you'll want to bring your LMS administrator along. We can't help you with that, but we can help explain to your LMS admin what it is that we're doing. If you are an LMS admin, come on in. And so this has been, this will be a really helpful way to get folks started. And I think a really fantastic way to learn more. So Joy's questions, will we test SAP? SAP is not actually, and I know they have a few LMSs, they are not currently on our list, Joy. So why don't you join in, bring your LMS and your LMS admin, and then you can be on the list. So just because we have 15 on the list or 14 on the list does not mean we can't have more. I think there are some, like last time I looked, 280 corporate LMSs. So that means there could be up to 280 LMSs that we test. So come on in. We have a huge possible population.
That's great. I love this. I love what you've done with the program partners, and you're testing your LMS here. You should like maybe create a report that you can share with people.
That's actually the plan, Karen. So the plan is by the end of cohort to write an article very similar to the one that Sean Putman was a part of a few years ago that reported out similar data on how authoring tools use, or learning record providers or activity providers send data. This is the same thing, just on the receiving end.
Yeah, so look at the good work you can do in cohort here. I think it's fabulous. Everyone gets together, they look at things, they work on things, and it's very collaborative, lots of peer learning. So thank you. Thanks, Megan, for sharing with us. And thanks, everyone, for sharing your time with us. We'll see you in week six next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.